Hello and welcome to Context. I hope you had a chance to listen to last week's discussion with Ryan Saville on the first episode of our Inequalooty series. This week in episode 2, Ryan and I continue on our conversation as we broadly address how Christians should respond to the looting. Here's a summary of the main points of the discussion, which can be accessed on the link below. The three main questions we answer are: 1. Why are Christians so polarized around the issue of looting? 2. Is looting an outright sin, or is it a bit more nuanced than that? What about the guys who were looting in their Jeeps and BMWs? Right, let's dig in. Why are Christians polarized around the issue of looting? That's the first point that we address. Ryan argues that it is so because we insist on single narratives. We are unable to hold multiple narratives in tension, and we end up dying on the altar of binary thinking. What is binary thinking or single narrative thinking? Our brains too often are dichotomizing machines. We tend to simplify the world into true or false statements, good or bad categories, and is or is not assertions. With the recent looting, our lack of context and the lack of humility to admit that we lack the requisite contextual understanding of our nation, and worse, even when we are made aware of the suffering, as Ryan argues in the podcast, that even if you don't live in the townships, you can tell that people are suffering and that things are desperate. Still, though, we choose single-story narratives as convenient vehicles that help us evade responsibility and allows us to ease our consciences by blaming the poor for being poor. This makes us say things like, because looting is stealing and stealing is forbidden, looting is wrong, regardless of how poor people are and what gave rise to their poverty. It simply does not matter. That's what we say. So how do we blame the poor for being poor? Well, with the looting, many Christians are quick to whip out the Bible as a bashing tool to condemn the looters. You may have heard statements like, this is pure sinful criminality, finish and klar. Before we move on, take a look at this picture. Pause this video, read the caption, and take all the time you need. Do you think there is anything wrong with it? Do the items stolen, nappies, maize meal, pots, a two-plate stove, a kettle, trouble you? Or do you commend the SAPS officials in Sedibeng for doing their jobs? The looter standing outside what I presume is his shack. Stole after all, isn't it? Or perhaps you are split, not sure how to feel. This makes me truly weep for our nation. My heart breaks when I see such things. The caption is one of our problems. We applaud police who can't deal with serious criminals to save their lives for capturing a vulnerable shack dweller living in poverty. The Bible is clear on God's heart for the poor. God is compassionate, yet we are full of condemnation, much like the Pharisees of Jesus' day. This is not to say that we should not condemn stealing, or we shouldn't expect the police to enforce the law. But contextual circumstances must be considered before we condemn. Why are we so entitled to our lack of empathy? This is because we have swallowed the poison of unbiblical ideologies, namely ideologies like meritocracy, especially in the case of South Africa's inequality. Let me explain what is meritocracy. Meritocracy, in simple terms, says you get what you deserve in life. Work hard and you'll be rich. Be lazy and you'll be poor. When you are poor, don't complain. You deserve to be poor. Meritocracy is false and is a harmful belief. I would argue that in many ways, meritocracy has an antichrist edge to it. As with many ideologies, part of its draw is that it justifies the status quo, explaining why people belong where they happen to be in the social ladder. It is well-established psychological principle that people prefer to believe that the world is just. A conscience silencer, a drug for the guilty heart is this meritocracy. And we know that scripture tells us fully well that we are not living in a just world. But these types of ideologies make us throw all of that away and tell ourselves that the world is just. Meritocracy also offers flattery, where success is determined by merit. Each win can be viewed as a reflection of one's own virtue and worth. Meritocracy is also self-congratulatory. It translates property into praise, material inequality into personal superiority. It allows the rich and powerful to view themselves as productive geniuses. While this effect is most noticeable amongst the elite, nearly any accomplishment can be viewed through meritocratic eyes. Graduating from high school, artistic success, or simply having money can all be seen as evidence of talent and effort. By the same token, worldly failures, poverty in South Africa's case, become signs of personal defects, providing reason why those at the bottom of the social hierarchy deserve to remain there. Laziness is one example. Ryan adds that systemic oppression is not new to South Africa or our day for that matter. It is well addressed in the Bible. The people of God were enslaved and oppressed in Egypt, and as soon as they were free, God gave them laws, of which most are social laws. In Leviticus, laws like the Jubilee laws, Leviticus 25, give back land to people who lost it, irrespective of the reasons why they lost it, so that the rich don't get too rich, as is the case in South Africa, and the poor don't get too poor. Laws about cleaning during harvest. Don't clean the entire field. Leave some for the poor. Laws about taxes. Every couple of years, take some tax and give to the poor and vulnerable. Don't charge interest to fellow Israelites, and don't enslave each other. You might be saying, Themba, I hear you, but the Bible is meritocratic. Whilst it is true that the Bible says people get poor because of laziness. For example, go and work, learn from the ant, you sluggard, Proverbs 6. But it also says people get poor because they get taken advantage of. Laws are made that impoverish people. The issue is not which narrative is right or wrong, but it is about holding this intention. By not acknowledging that the reductionism and the oversimplification of why things are the way they are is being prideful and uncaring. A single narrative is dangerous when assessing poverty, especially in South Africa, where we know our history. We know where we come from. We know people being dispossessed of land. We know people being precluded from attending university or learning certain subjects at school. We know about the Bantu education. We know about people being put in far-flung areas away from economic participation. We know that people not being allowed to start shops. We know all these things. And so when we use a single narrative, it is a spit in the face on the suffering of the people of this country. Meritocracy is unbiblical when it claims that people get what they deserve. We have done nothing to deserve God's gift and salvation. And no matter how hard we work, salvation is a gift we accept. How dare we, knowing full well that even our salvation has got nothing to do with our work, yet when it comes to the issues of this country, we flip the script and suddenly work is everything. We need to be more humble, more kind, and more caring towards the poor. The Bible is clear. God's heart is on social justice. God's heart is anti-extreme inequality and is pro-poor. Simple. 2. Yeah, Themba, I hear you going on about ideologies, etc. Aren't you just rationalizing sin? The Bible is clear that looting, as in stealing, is a sin. I pose this question to Ryan. Ryan agrees that the Bible is clear that stealing is a sin, the 8th commandment, and it prohibits theft. And yes, it is criminal. However, he also does layer it with biblical context, often left out, but the looting is a sin and his criminal brigade. He mentions Psalms and Proverbs like Proverbs 6 verses 30 to 31. People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he is starving. He encourages us to approach this discussion with a lot more humility. It's not as black and white as many would have it. To blame looting on criminality alone is short-sighted and inauthentic. It is intellectual dishonesty. We know the challenges of this country. We have staggering, unsustainable inequality on all fronts, from education, land, healthcare, space, etc. It seems we ended apartheid in law but did not end its spirit. Despite significant economic growth, major social transformation, and racial inclusiveness since the end of apartheid, wealth inequality in South Africa has not reduced, according to a study by researchers from the World Inequality Lab of the Paris School of Economics and the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at the University of Witwatersrand. I'll put the link of this study in the bottom. Perhaps you might want to check it out for yourself. It estimates that the distribution of household wealth in South Africa from 1993 to 2017 has not really moved or shifted from the patterns of apartheid. The study shows that the stark difference in wealth concentration, where the top 1% own a higher share of wealth than the bottom 99%, has persisted since the end of apartheid. South Africa's wealth inequality estimates are higher than that of France, the UK, the US, Russia, China, and India. It says that the top 10% of South African wealth holders own more than 85% of household wealth, while the top 1% wealth share reaches 55%. The report read the top 0.01%, or about 3,500 individuals, own a 15% share of household wealth, greater than the share held by the bottom 90%, or 32 million individuals. Their average wealth is more than 1,500 times greater than the national average and 6,000 times greater than the average of the bottom 90%, the report read. By comparison, the average wealth of the bottom 50% is negative, which means their liabilities or debt levels exceed the market value of their assets. Ryan also points out that we need to bring prophetic imagination to the inequality problem. It is a sure sign that there is enough for everyone. And I agree with this. We as a country are rated 5th in the world in terms of its wealth by the Citibank and the IMF. Yet we have a 63% unemployment rate for our youth below the age of 24. Youth simply idle doing nothing. As the saying goes, an idle mind is a devil's workshop. Did we wonder why? That when looting started, we had so many young people on the streets. Number 3, what about the guys who were looting in their Jeeps and their BMWs? Now here, Ryan says we must also be aware of the danger of doing social analysis by looking at the exceptions rather than the norms. CEOs driving Mercs and looting at Woolies store is certainly an exception, but a troubling one nonetheless. A norm is probably the picture we need to look at. It's probably the same picture as one we saw when we started this video of this guy standing outside his shack. The truth is that we live in a largely untransformed society that has done away with the law of apartheid but has not destroyed its spirit. In conclusion, we must approach this discussion with a lot more humility. It's not as black and white as many would have it. How do we do that? By acknowledging that I have certain privileges that aren't shared by everyone. Don't blame the poor for being poor. We must also be aware of the danger of doing social analysis by looking at the exceptions rather than the norms. The rich looter narrative helps us escape accountability for the toxic structure of our social affairs that facilitates ripe ground for looting and lawlessness. There is enough for everyone. We need prophetic imagination as believers. That's it for today. Next week, we head to Kwandonga Zibovu or Pietermaritzburg, where we speak to Mosala Balatseng, the lead pastor of Grace Generation Church. We zone in on our hypocrisy when condemning looting and how we as believers can be more front-footed on these issues and not just reactive. If you have any questions on anything that we have discussed, or perhaps you would like to suggest a topic we should discuss on context, leave me a comment below. The person with the best question or suggestion stands a chance to win a copy of my memoir, Village Boy, a story of hope for the fatherless, up on your screen right now, that not only will keep you engaged, but will help you grapple with the context of South Africa. Please also like and share this video with those who you think will benefit from the content. Thank you for watching. With those words, I want to say, Salani kahle. Until next time, cheers, bye-bye.